Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in beautiful San Diego. Thank you so much for subscribing to this channel. Please make sure that you like the video you've just watched and consider making a contribution on our app or on our website. It's really easy to do, and thank you in advance for that support. It does make a difference. So master's level living is what we're looking at today, and we've been exploring together this idea of a master's program in spirituality, kind of building upon the theme of graduation and going back to school, and how people who really decide to commit themselves to becoming super knowledgeable in any particular area of study wind up being a blessing and an asset to society. But imagine if we had a society filled with graduates of spiritual mastery. Imagine the kind of world we would be creating, the problems we would be solving, and the opportunities that we would be creating for ourselves and for future generations. We had a society of graduates of spiritual mastery. And I think that in our New Thought teachings, we are given tools to help us be able to become spiritual masters, to be able to bring a spiritual perspective and approach and a way of being to all dimensions of our lives. When listening to Daniel's song, Easy Does It, I think about the joy of that, and I think about where I am in my life and how good am I at living with this feeling of easy does it. And in some places better than others. Is that true for some of you as well? As you listen, did you resonate at all with those words, easy does it? Like, yeah, I want more of that. I want more of that. And I think that part of the way that we get there is through the practice of some very basic things. I really like that Bruce Lee quote. I'm not afraid of the person who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but wow, the person who has practiced one 10,000 times, that's the person I'm afraid of. Now, I'm not a proponent of being afraid of things, and I doubt that you are either, but the idea being a focused practice in certain things in our lives brings about excellence, but it also brings about freedom. And it brings about a certain amount of ease and grace. I think years ago I had a member of our church ask me, this particular member knows that I am by nature a pretty disciplined and responsible person. And I am not one that shies away from doing the things that need to be done over and over and over. And as I was in conversation with this person, they were asking me, well, doesn't that feel like binding to be so disciplined and so going over certain basic things again and again? That would just make me feel so trapped. And I said, no, because the byproduct of that is a sense of freedom. The more we practice a certain basic way of thinking and being, the freer and easier it becomes. And that's what I think we have in these New Thought teachings. So we've been looking at this idea of a master's program in spirituality. We have looked at the different layers and phases, if you will, of consciousness, from the first phase that all of us kind of start out at, the phase of life is just happening to me, that we're not really sure why and how things happen. Sometimes it's called the victim stage. We might be into looking outward and blaming and finding the causes outside of ourselves. And oftentimes what happens is then we get hit with a cosmic 2x4, or suddenly we start to learn stuff about how life works that we didn't know before. We start to kind of awaken and grow up, and we begin to move into that level of awareness where we recognize that, hey, we can be co-creative in our life, and we need to be co-creative, and we start to take responsibility, and we start to realize that everything in our world is created twice, first in mind and then in physical form. And so we're at the manifestor level. And that can get exciting and fun. And then we realize that there's another dimension even beyond that transcends and includes the metaphysician or the manifestation level, but then includes this level of what we might call the mystic, where life takes on a partnership with that ineffable energy called God or spirit. And life begins to be something that we experience happening through us, a co-creative energy that is not just limited on our own individual capacities. And then the ultimate really being that there's no differentiation between us and it with a capital I, between us and God. And so we looked at that, and we looked at that in the first week with regard to where are we along those 4 layers or those 4 phases when challenges happen in our life. Who shows up? The victim or the metaphysician or the mystic or the master? Where are we in our relationship with God? Do we only turn to God by whatever name we call God? Do we only turn there when everything else we have tried has seemed to fail? That's kind of the last resort. And then we looked at where are we with regard to how we walk upon this precious planet. Where are we in our relationship with Mother Earth? And how do we show up with our spiritual practice there? And then last week we started to explore more deeply this idea of divine guidance and intuition. And I hope you remember the simple formula I gave you, the 1, 2, 3, the listen, follow, and observe. That's how you build upon guidance. You listen, then you follow the guidance you get, and you observe. And the answer to, well, how do you know if it's spirit or God is, well, listen, don't follow, and observe. You'll quickly discover what the divine, what God, what spirit sounds like or feels like inside of you. And I say sounds like or feels like because I think God's language is very nuanced. And I believe that God's language can be very individualized, a very personal experience of it, that it doesn't always sound or feel exactly the same way. But we do, with practice of listening, following, or not following, and observing, we get better at being able to discern it, of how it sounds and feels inside of us. So when we do, we have this added dimension in our life, and I think almost an added layer of confidence in approaching things in our life, because we realize we're not relying on only our own best thinking. Does that make sense? Okay. So what is the master's level of living? I've been in New Thought and in metaphysics since the late 1970s, so a very, very long time. And I've seen an evolution in our understanding of our teachings and an evolution in the way that people who are drawn into this spiritual practice have grown and matured. I've seen us grow and embrace more than just taking these teachings for our own individual betterment. I've seen us grow as individuals and as a movement to embrace these teachings for our own growth, yes, also, though, in service to the collective benefit. I've also seen us mature out of what I consider to be the initial steps of metaphysics. And when I think of the initial steps of metaphysics, I think of the level of by me, the level that became very popular with the movie and with the book, The Secret. How many of you remember that? Right? It's like, wow. It was like so many people were watching and talking about the secret of manifestation. And yes, that's fun and it's good and it's a part of the teaching, but it's very much an entry-level part of the teaching. Our teaching, our practice, spiritual mastery, I guess what I'm trying to say, is not just about having and getting. It's not just about prosperity. It's not just about manifesting your goals. There's much more to it than that. There's a progression from the having to the doing to the being. Think about that for a moment. A progression from having, nothing wrong with having, but if we stay there and we limit our practice and we limit our focus to that portion of our teaching, we will feel very empty. We will feel like something's missing because something is missing. There's no amount of stuff and there's no amount of even achieving goals that will give us a sustained sense of fulfillment. And even an over-focus on the doing falls short. Think about what happens oftentimes, not always, but think about what happens oftentimes when a person has devoted their entire adult life to a particular career. And then it's time for retirement and they leave that career. Oftentimes what happens is a person's whole sense of identity is shattered. And I'm thinking of you, Virginia Berger, and your life coaching work about helping people who are nearing retirement or just out of retirement, make sure that they recognize that there's so much more to them than the role that they once played or the doingness that they once did, right? It's understanding more of who we are as spiritual beings at the very core. Another very simple example is what happens to parents when their children grow up and finally leave the nest and stay out of the nest. That's a new phenomenon that's especially popular in California, right, with the cost of living. But, when they leave the nest, it's like, well, if the whole identity was wrapped up in the doingness of being a parent, then there's this real shaking of the foundation beneath one's feet and the need to understand, wait a minute, my life isn't just about having, and it's not just about doing. It's about being and about becoming. And that, I think, is a powerful turn on the evolutionary spiral of spiritual growth. And how do we do that? I think we do more of that by allowing God to move through us, by practicing more being in partnership. And if the word God bothers you, and I can really relate to that because I had a lot of hang-ups about that word for a long time, but if the word God bothers you, then use another word for it. An energy, the force. I like Star Wars for that reason. It made it very easy for people to talk about what I think God is without the religious stuff that has turned so many people, quite rightly, off of religion. But to be willing, more than willing, to actually want and to actually pursue being used by and through and with this force. It's to be able to be human and divine. It's to be able to say, yes, as a human being, there are certain things I'd like to bring forth in my life. There are certain goals that I have. There's nothing wrong with having goals and dreams. There's everything right about it. Spiritual mastery says, though, give spirit, give God, give the force some room to work with you and through you and see the magic that can happen. Because it can. Because it can. I want to share two examples with you. One example comes from a colleague. And it's a few years old, but I remember this example because I was so moved by it. It was a ministerial colleague sharing a story about her son and about her teaching her son this idea of letting go and letting God. Letting go and letting God. And letting go and letting God is not two different things. A lot of times we think we let go and then we let God. It's in the letting go that we allow God. It's a simultaneous movement. Letting go is letting God. So anyway, my friend's son came home from high school one day and said, Mom, I need $80. And at that time, $80 was quite a lot of money. They didn't have $80 just sitting around. But he said, Mom, I need $80. And my friend, smart enough, on the spot, said, well, wait a minute, what do you need $80 for? And her son said, a tuxedo for the prom. And my friend said, well, no, you don't actually need $80. You need a tuxedo. Let's focus on the tuxedo. Let's, for the next week, I want you to practice letting go and letting God, because you don't need $80. You need a tuxedo for the prom. You're not going to wear $80 to the prom, but you're going to wear a tuxedo. So let go and let God, and let's see what will happen if you can manifest this tuxedo. My friend later said she was really feeling like she was out on a limb with this one. She would have rather have had the $80 to give her son the $80. And believe me, as 16 years old, he probably would have preferred the $80 too. But he went along with the ride. And part of the way through the week, he thought, well, gosh, if he had this idea. And the idea was, well, if I really believed that I could let go and let God, then I would actually go to the tuxedo shop and I would get fully measured for the absolute perfect tuxedo. Cost wouldn't matter. I'd go for the one I really wanted, and I'd get measured. And that would be a way of just, proving that I believe, let go and let God. So he went to the tuxedo shop, and he got fully measured for it. And when they were all done, and he said, this is the one I want, they said, now you need to put down your 50% deposit. And he said, well, I don't have 50%. I don't have any money. And the clerk kind of looked at him and said, well, wait just a minute. The clerk went to the manager, came back and said, you know what? The manager had been talking about how do we get more kids at your school to buy or rent their tux from us? And the manager had an idea that if we could find a willing student to wear a tuxedo one day a week for the rest of the year before prom, we would give that student the tuxedo of his choice. What do you think he did? He gladly wore a tuxedo to school that entire time. Not only did he get his tuxedo, he didn't need the $80. He got the best looking tuxedo and was voted the best dressed guy in all of that class. Yeah, you can clap for that. I think it's a great example, right? So sometimes we have to keep in mind, what is the real goal, right? What is it that we really want? And are we giving God some room? Are we able to let go? He was fixated first on what? On specifically the $80. Was his mother right? That did he need the $80? No, what he really needed, what he really wanted was a tuxedo. The $80 was one way that the tuxedo could come. It takes faith, and I think a little bit of playfulness too. It takes faith and a little bit of playfulness to get really clear on the what it is that we want, but then to step back and to be as open as we know how, that what could come to us in very unusual ways. It's the idea of holding the goal, holding the dream, but holding lightly the how it gets there. There's another story that's a life and death story, actually, true story. How many of you are familiar with he's an author, he's a spiritual leader, was a master sea captain, a scuba diving instructor, a professional chef. The list of things this person has done goes on and on. His name is Bob Trask. In 1987, he wrote a book called God's Phone Number. And that book actually became an inspiration to Neil Donald Walsh to write the book Conversations with God that became a super big bestseller. But Bob Trask's book, God's Phone Number, begins with the story of Bob, true story, sea captain on this sailing a ship on the South Seas, he and 4 crew members and 22 passengers. And as an accomplished sea captain, he had lots of experience and lots of plans for how to handle all sorts of things that might come up on the sea. So he was well equipped with all the the skill and the mental knowledge that you would want a sea captain to have. But as they're out at sea, a very terrible storm, a hurricane-sized storm comes up, and they're in a very dangerous situation. And he tries all of the plans that he knows should work. He tries everything by the book to try to save his crew because he knows that they could lose their lives. And so he feels a tremendous sense of responsibility. He tries all 5 plans, and nothing works for him. Nothing works for him at all. And so in this book, he writes about the experience of that being transformative for him, because obviously he couldn't write the book if the storm took him and the crew and the 22 people out, right? That the experience was a transforming experience for him, because up to that point in his life, for many reasons, he relied only on the strength of his mind and his physical experience and his personal training to accomplish everything in his life. But out at sea, having exercised everything he knew to do and having it fail, he had to rely on something else. And this is what he writes. He says, "I didn't know before that night that being helpless does not mean being powerless. I just couldn't beat the hurricane. I was helpless in the face of it. As the dictionary says, without protection or help, incompetent and ineffective, like an alcoholic hitting bottom. I finally got it. Unless help came from somewhere bigger than me, we were doomed. It took a full hurricane to bring me to this realization. I don't think most people need a hurricane. They can probably sidestep their egos with less encouragement. I had always thought that allowing myself to feel helpless was being dependent. But I was dependent all along. I was ego-dependent. And I couldn't get help from my God because I was unwilling to admit I needed it. The first thing we must do then, if we want to get divine assistance, is to completely accept our place in the order of the universe." It's a powerful point he's saying he came to, of exercising everything he knew to do, but that didn't cause a breakthrough for him, and he had to completely let go. He goes on to say, "Am I willing to do whatever it takes to have the things I want, even if it means sidestepping my ego?" I asked myself that deep question, and then I said yes. Listen. He says, "I had been raised in a particular religion, but I had left that religion. My decision to leave it came after a number of experiences, one of which was that in an accident as a young boy, I had accidentally shot and killed my brother when he was 10 years old. The pain of that, the guilt of that, was reinforced in the church I attended, and I left that church. I had a number of experiences where I felt that God did not respond to my prayers, so for many years I had no conscious relationship with a higher power. It took that moment when the lives of 27 people were seemingly in my hands for me to finally ask a higher power to give me help. Suddenly I had an idea. Something to do, not one that I had consciously ever thought of before. Not one that I had ever consciously thought of before. And then another, and then another, and then another. Not only were there 4 crewmen and I saved, but all 22 of our passengers were saved, as well as the boat itself. There is no physical way that we could have had this happen considering the hurricane we were in, but there is every way we could have had it happen considering the God we were with." Powerful, right? Powerful. So for us, I don't know where you might be struggling or hurting in your life. And if you are, I do hope that you reach out to our prayer ministry and to Silent Unity. I don't know what you're dreaming of or working toward. And you can also, when you're dreaming and working towards something, reach out to the prayer ministry and to Silent Unity. But regardless of which place you find yourself in your life, whether it's a time that's really difficult right now and you're struggling and you're trying to figure it out every which way from Sunday, or you're working diligently hard towards something that's really important to you, but nothing seems to be moving in the right direction, can you take a willingness to step back and go within and practice that very, very skillful balance on this tightrope between knowing what you want, not the $80, but the tuxedo, right? Between knowing what you want and then giving God room to just blast you with an idea that came from somewhere else. You'll recognize it when it's that kind of idea. You'll recognize it because it just seems to show up. You'll recognize it because you know yourself well enough to be familiar with what your own thinking produces. And this will feel a little bit different. It will feel like it came out of the blue. Like the idea that my friend's son had that came out of the blue. Well, maybe I should go get measured for the tuxedo. Or the out of the blue step, and then another step, and then another step, and another step that came to Bob Trask. But in each case, there had to be a willingness to be clear on what you wanted to have happen. Tuxedo, save our lives. But trusting enough and open enough to yield to that force that is greater than any single one of us. Namaste.